Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Easy 11 Plus live lesson on multiple choice comprehension, focusing on some very difficult questions with a difficult text. I've done quite a few comprehension lessons on multiple choice skills already, so it seems a good time to take things a step further. Please remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Don't forget that these live lessons are every Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock. Check out the links in the video description, including lots of freebies. And finally, don't forget that the worksheet for today's lesson is also linked in the video description, where you can print it out and try the questions for yourself. Phew, that was quite a lot. Enough of all that. Let's get started. So, you will already have read the text, and if you haven't read the text, I recommend you pause this video, print it out, or even just open the file, take a moment to read the passage for yourself. It's fairly complex, and you'll need to think about it a little bit before we get into this. Now, assuming you've already read it, the first question says, which option best describes the Italian militiamen's appearance? I think just in case people haven't read the text, or in case they've read it and haven't quite understood what's going on, I should say that this passage is based on George Orwell's experiences in the 1930s in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. And at the beginning of the text, he's writing about one young soldier that he saw there and who inspired him to think quite deeply about what was happening in this place at this time. So we're asked to choose the option that best describes his appearance. So before we look at the options, let's look at the text and find where the relevant information is likely to be. And we'll be skipping to and fro between the text and the questions a lot during this lesson, and those of you who know my lessons will be used to that by now. So, in the Lenin barracks in Barcelona the day before I joined the militia, I saw an Italian militiaman standing in front of the officer's table. He was a tough-looking youth of 25 or 6 with reddish yellow hair and powerful shoulders. His peaked leather cap was pulled fiercely over one eye. He was standing in profile to me, his chin in his breast, gazing with a puzzled frown. Why I'm underlining these things is because I've already looked at the question. I know it's particularly about the appearance of the young man, and the options are really focused on his the impression of his personal characteristics that we get. So let's have a glance now, actually. Is he young and vulnerable? Is he powerful and determined, confident and charismatic, pretty and delicate, or arrogant yet scared? So those are the sorts of things that we're looking for here. Let's go back to the text. Something in his face deeply moved me. It was the face of a man who would commit murder and throw his life away for a friend. The kind of face you would expect in an anarchist, though as likely as not he was a communist. This is quite an interesting political distinction, but it isn't relevant to the questions I've chosen for this lesson, so I'm going to be skipping that and not getting into interesting details of political history. There were both candour and ferocity in it. Also the pathetic reverence that illiterate people have for their supposed superiors. We'll come to that with a later question. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I think that's enough for us here. So he's tough looking, he's got powerful shoulders, his cap is pulled down fiercely, he's got a puzzled frown, however, and his expression shows candour and ferocity. I'm not going to explain all those words. Let's see what we can do with the options. I told you this was a difficult comprehension. So, does he seem young and vulnerable? Well, he's tough looking with powerful shoulders, so he may look young, but vulnerable doesn't really match the case here. Powerful and determined, well, we've seen that he has powerful shoulders and he's got his cap pulled down fiercely, so that might be quite a good match. So, could well be. Confident and charismatic. Well, you might not be sure about charismatic, but is he confident? Well, he's standing there, gazing with a puzzled frown at the map. And he seems to have, if you understand what this is about, a sort of pathetic reverence for the people in front of him. So how much confidence do we really see here? Doesn't seem quite right. If you know what charisma is, it's a kind of energy in someone's personality that really inspires people and makes them want to follow them. I'm not sure that we see evidence of that, but I really think that we can't be sure about saying that he seems confident when he's got so much doubt about this map and what it's all about. So probably not. Pretty and delicate, he's tough looking and powerful and fierce. No. Arrogant yet scared. Well, I'll save you a bit of effort. There's nothing in here to suggest that he's at all arrogant. And while he does look puzzled and concerned, in the sense that he doesn't seem to fully understand what's going on, he doesn't seem scared of anything here. So I think we can cut that one. I'm going to push the mic down a little bit. I think I'm bouncing it a little bit with my voice. Let's see if that's a little bit better. So there's no evidence for either of those. So we're left just with powerful and determined, which does seem to fit his fierce expression and his tough-looking, powerful appearance. So we can choose that. Now, in an exam, you might quickly skim the others to see that they don't match as well as powerful and determined, and save yourself a little bit of time. But here I'm going through a bit more thoroughly so that you get the hang of the technique that's involved here. In other words, we're eliminating, getting rid of the things that can't be right, keeping an eye on the things that we think might be right, and making sure that they are the only things left over. And then at the end, if there's more than one, then we have to work out how to choose between them. But in this case, there was one that was quite likely, 4 that didn't really match, and so it was quite straightforward. That's the core of the multiple choice technique that I teach. Again, if you're in an exam and you want to save time, first of all, you'll spot the powerful and determined, option B looks likely, and then you'll quickly scan the others and get rid of the ones that are obviously wrong, like pretty and delicate, vulnerable, arrogant probably, and you're left with powerful, determined, confident and charismatic, and then you say, well, powerful and determined is a cleaner fit. So you move a little bit faster like that. But do keep checking the text, as I've been doing, and going to and fro as you make your decision so that everything you do is passage based. Because one of the key things about more difficult multiple choice comprehension is that often you're talking about very subtle differences in the text. And if you don't keep going back to the text, you're liable to end up in a bit of a mess. Beg your pardon? Why did the Italian militiaman look at the map with a puzzled frown? Let's glance at the options now, because he didn't like the information in the map, because he thought the officers were making poor decisions, because he was wondering where Orwell came from, because he did not know how to read a map, or because he feared that the officers did not know how to read a map. Okay, let's have a look at the text. By the way, this is a really good reason to print off the worksheet if you can before one of my lessons, because that way you can have the questions and the text open at the same time and do the kind of checking to and fro that I'm doing in your own way. I don't have space to show both of them on my screen at the same time, so those of you who are just watching this miss out a little bit. If you want to get my worksheets before the lessons, by far the easiest way to do it is look in the video description under any of my videos and see the link for the free papers and solutions. If you go there and you enter your email address to get those, then also each week you'll get an email with the worksheet for the lesson a few days in advance so that you can try it over the weekend and be ready for the lesson. Anyway, back into this. Don't know why I'm full of phlegm and coughing, but I am. Why did he look at the map with a puzzled frown? Okay, so where is the puzzled frown? The puzzled frown is in line 5. In fact, let's change our colour for this so we can see our different underlinings. So we got puzzled frown here, and then we see that he could not make head or tail of the map. Obviously, he regarded map reading as a stupendous intellectual feat. Right. So what does that tell us? He's puzzled by the map and he could not make head or tail of it. So if we go back to the options, that must really be steering us towards he did not know how to read a map. Let's check the others quickly, because he feared that the officers did not know how to read a map, the last option. No, he could not make head or tail of it. He did not like the information conveyed by the map. That isn't what not being able to make head or tail of it means. He seemed to feel the officers were making poor decisions, not relevant. He was wondering where Orwell came from, nothing to hint towards that. So in fact, D is quite straightforwardly the answer. So why is this an advanced question? Well, let's look back at the text. We've been sent in to line 5, which says that he was gazing with a puzzled frown at the map. Whoa, that's a bit too much underlining, sorry about that. And so you'll be tempted just to look around there. He's gazing with a puzzled frown, but why is he puzzled? Something in his face deeply moved me. It's about, oh well, what's that got to do with anything? And you could be completely stuck because the line that it's guided to you towards does not answer the question. You have to have read the passage already in advance and know your way around it well enough that you know that there is more information just afterwards around line 10. Oops, slightly excessive circling, more like this, where it says he could not make head or tail of it. And that is the important information that answers the question. So once you find the information, this is not a difficult question. But finding the information requires you to have done a really careful read in advance. And that's a difficult skill when you're under time pressure in an exam. So things can be difficult in all sorts of different ways. I can see all sorts of comments saying, I passed different exams, fantastic, congratulations to you who've passed various 11 plus tests, and I'm very flattered that you're still here watching this lesson in that case. People passed Tiffin, Queen Elizabeth Boys, Wilson's, lots of London exams here. Fantastic, congratulations everybody. Fahamed says, somebody said, what does stupendous mean? In this case, it means fantastic, wonderful, amazing. Okay. People marking my coughs in. Okay, anyway, thank you for your comments. Let's push on. So, next question. So next one I blanked out. This is from a much longer paper in one of my comprehension books, RSL Multiple Choice Comprehension, book 2. But I wasn't going to give you the whole paper because we don't have time for it in a lesson like this. So I'm just skipping past lots of things. The next one is, we've got 1, 2, 3, 11. Question 11. Okay. What did Orwell find striking about customer service, for example, in shops and restaurants? The people who worked there didn't treat customers as their social superiors. Okay, what does that mean? So the people who worked there, so, probably waiters particularly and so on, didn't treat customers as their social superior. What's a social superior? Well, it's someone you look up to because of their status. So this is the kind of thing that was stronger in the old days. So for example, if someone was, Sir What's-His-Face or, Lady Muck the Duck, you might defer to them and look up to them and do what they told you. And these days that's perhaps a little bit less widespread, but still, for example, if you met the Queen, you'd probably call her ma'am and behave very respectfully. So that's an example of treating someone as a social superior. It's having certain ways of behaving that show that you are placing yourself on a lower level compared to somebody else. Contexts in your life where this might occur more normally. With a teacher, you'll treat them with deference and respect, I hope, and they will feel free to give you instructions and expect them to be followed. So that's an example of a social hierarchy. Okay, so the people who worked there didn't treat their customers as superiors. They didn't say, come here, sir, have a seat, sir, is there anything I can do for you? I'm terribly sorry. None of that. B, the shops and restaurants had been demolished. Hang on a sec. Question, what did Orwell find striking about customer service? B has got nothing to do with customer service. Before we look at the passage, it cannot be right. C, it was very efficient and systematic. D, you were expected to look waiters and shop workers in the eyes. E, people only worked hard if you tipped them generously. You know what tipping is. It's when you give extra money on top of the bill to thank the person who served you. Right. The things I'm explaining here, I'm explaining things that I think you're likely to be able to work out yourselves looking at this paper, based on your knowledge. Let's go into the text. So I'm going to save you a bit of effort and say that this involves skipping on a fair bit. In fact, the second page is all about questions that were between question 3 and question 10. None of that relates to what we're looking at here. You've got a nice picture of communist banners on the front of the Hotel Colón in Barcelona during the revolutionary period in Spain. But anyway, putting that behind us. Okay, so we are looking at, have to remind myself. Oh yeah, so it's this paragraph here. And you can see there's lots of information about what was going on there at the time. So we know that almost every building of any size had been seized by the workers and covered in flags and so on. That's what the picture was showing. Graffiti on the walls. Churches had been demolished. Okay, so that's perhaps what option B was trying to trick you with. But there's nothing about shops and restaurants being demolished. Anyway, that's not about customer service. Okay, collectivization, waiters and shop walkers. Okay, so suddenly we're into something that looks relevant. Waiters and shop walkers looked you in the face and treated you as an equal. And it goes on to say servile, might be a word you don't know, and even ceremonial forms of speech had temporarily disappeared. Nobody said señor or don or even usted. Okay, everyone... That's my attempt at Spanish. Everyone called everyone else comrade and thou and said salud instead of buenos dias, blah, 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 blah. But I think we might have found the key information. Waiters and shop workers shop walkers, so people who walked around shops, service assistants, looked you in the face and treated you as an equal. Let's go back to the question. Right. People who worked there didn't detrust from social superiors, maybe. It was very efficient and systematic. We haven't come across anything to do with that. I'll save you a bit of effort and say if you read more thoroughly, there isn't anything to do with that. You were expected to look waiters and shop workers in the eyes. There was something about looking in the eyes. People only worked hard if you tipped them generously. Haven't seen that yet. Right, let's consider these again. Is it about treating people as social superiors, looking up to people, so on? Is it about looking people in the eyes? Is it about tipping? Waiters and shop walkers looked you in the face and treated you as an equal. It's not about you looking them in the eyes. It's not D. Okay. Could it be E? Could it be about tipping? Tipping was forbidden by law. Okay. Almost my first experience was receiving a lecture from a hotel manager for trying to tip a lift boy. And there's some very interesting politics around the history of tipping. In some cultures, people serving you really expect to be tipped. If you're in the United States, people will expect to be tipped very heavily. In some cultures, it's seen as a sign of condescension, of saying, you're my servant, therefore I give you money. And it's also seen as something that keeps down normal wages. Because, for example, a restaurant owner can say, I'm not going to pay you as much money because you're making money in tips, so I don't need to pay you as much salary. And so, for these reasons, in some cultures, tipping is seen as bad. And this is an example of a cultural setup at that time when tipping was seen as bad and in fact was illegal. So, definitely not that option there. So we are left with A as the only possibility. People didn't treat customers as their social superiors, and in fact it does say waiters and shop walkers looked you in the face and treated you as an equal. So in other words, it wasn't please come here sir, lovely to see you, but it was come over here, here's a seat. So a different kind of service environment. By the way, I should have been writing the letters in the answer spaces. Very bad. Throwing away marks all over the place in an exam, but things get forgotten in a live lesson. Terrible excuse. Okay, onwards. 12 is greyed out. Question 13. Why were there no private motor cars, line 54, in Barcelona? Let's pop into the text and underline that in line 54 so that we know where we are. What colour should we go for here? Let's go for that. Okay, line 54. There were no private motor cars. Let's read around this before we look at the options. They had all been commandeered, whatever that means, because some words may not be familiar to you when you're looking at the text. That's often the case, especially with a challenging comprehension like this. And all the blah, blah, blah painted red and black, not so relevant. Posters were everywhere, flaming the walls in clean red, blah, 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 blah. Down the Ramblas, the wide central artery of the town, where people went to and fro all the time. The speakers were blaring out, and so on and so forth. I think we've got the key bit about cars. Now let's use it. There were no private motor cars. They had all been commandeered. They'd all been burnt. Okay, maybe commandeered means that. They couldn't easily be seen because the revolutionary posters were so distracting. Can that be right? Well, the posters flamed from the walls in a way that made the few remaining adverts look like daubs of mud. Nothing about the cars there. No, 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 no. Because people preferred to walk down the Ramblers rather than drive. Well, you can see in the text that the Ramblers is the wide central artery of the town. It's one place, the main street. So the fact that people preferred to walk down the Ramblers wouldn't really explain why there weren't any cars anywhere. That's like, someone pedestrianises Oxford Street and suddenly everybody in London gets rid of their car. It doesn't make sense. They'd all been taken by the authorities, perhaps for military use. Need to think about that some more. There were private cars, but they'd been painted in different colours. Well, the text says clearly that there were no private motor cars, and there's nothing about them being painted. We can see that much of the other transports had been painted, not the cars. So that is not right. We're left with A and D. Had they been burnt or had they been taken by the authorities, perhaps for military use? Well, what's the suggestion that they might have been burnt? The posters were flaming from the walls. That's not about the cars, whatever that might mean. I don't see anything to suggest that the cars had all been burnt. They had been commandeered. Now, you may not know that word, but when you don't know a word, think about what other words that you do know it might be hinting at. That was an awful sentence I just said. Sorry about that. Anyway, you may well recognize the word command. They'd all been command-eared. What might that suggest? Well, someone has given a command, they've given an order. If there were no private motor cars because someone had given an order, something to do with them, that's surely going to steer us towards D. They'd been taken by the authorities and who had commanded the cars, commandeered them. There's nothing at all to support A, they've been burnt. This seems to match very well. And indeed, that's what commandeer does mean. It means when something is taken over by a military or government order, some private property is taken over in that way. So the cars have been commandeered. The government or the army has said, we need to use these, we're taking them. Thank you, bye-bye. Bye-bye car. Try and remember to write the letter in this time. Let's see what's happening in the comments. Nipendra says the word command is in it. Fantastic, well done. SM says, what does servile mean? Good question. I deliberately skipped that because you didn't need to know it to find the answer to the question. And that's one thing I want you to get used to, that when there's a word you aren't familiar with, if it's essential, you try and work it out. Perhaps you do that anyway, but also don't hang around and get stuck because there may well be other clues that will help you to find the answer you need. But answering your question, we can use the same kind of technique. Let's try and find servile in the passage. Here we are. Servile and even ceremonial forms of speech had temporarily disappeared. Okay, well, servile includes a serve beginning, and you know that "ile" is a suffix that's often put on the end of other things. Serve, so to do with service or being a Latin servus, slave. So servile behaviour is behaviour like a servant or a slave. Okay? So this is about people not talking in ways that, as we were saying earlier, put them at a lower social status than other people. So rather than calling people sir, for example, senor, the example in the next line, people were just calling people things like comrade and thou. So equal level terms of address. So it's a bit like if you said to your teacher, hey there, or something, whatever you say that's informal to your friends, rather than calling them sir or Mr. Whiffle or whatever their name might be. Tahir says the mic is bouncing. Sorry, when I get enthusiastic and I kind of bend into it like this and it goes pop, 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 and you get lots of pop on it. But always if I had a pop guard, then you'd see it sticking up above the bottom of the screen there. So I'm just accepting the odd bit of popping in the mic. Okay, onwards to the next question. How are we doing for time here? Medium. We'll get through this. It won't take forever. Which adjective best describes the revolutionary posters, line 56, that Orwell saw everywhere. Okay, line 56, revolutionary posters. Dull, multicoloured, muddy, boring, striking. Let's go for a different colour now. Let's go for red because we're talking about revolutionary posters. Seems appropriate. So here are the revolutionary posters. They were flaming from the walls in clean reds and blues that made the few remaining advertisements look like daubs of mud. Okay, you don't need to know what daubs mean to get the sense of this, but if something's daubed, it means roughly painted. So like like mud has been splashed on the walls. Right, so were they dull? They most certainly weren't. They were flaming from the walls. Were they multicoloured? Well, they were red and black. Were they muddy? No, they made the old advertising posters seem like daubs of mud by comparison, very clearly. Were they boring? Absolutely not. They were flaming from the walls. Were they striking? Yes, clearly. Okay, were they multicoloured or striking? Well, what about multicoloured? We can see that they were in clean reds and blues. There's more than one colour, but multi doesn't mean two. It means many. Okay? If you have a multicultural society, it means it's got many cultures, not just two. If you've got a multi-storey building, that doesn't just mean a two-storey house. It means something heading towards being a skyscraper, and so on and so forth. Multi doesn't mean groups of two. It means many. Whereas these are certainly striking posters, they are flaming from the walls, and they make the other adverts look muddy just by comparison with how striking they are. So it's definitely E, striking, and it is not B, multicoloured. But that's tricky. If you aren't certain about multicoloured, you can still see that they are very clearly striking. That matches the description so well that hopefully you're likely to choose it. Right. Onwards. Well done to everybody posting their things. Farmed says, bye, I have to go eat. Enjoy your dinner. I hope it's fabulous. And you can always come back and watch the rest of the lesson later, because of course all these lessons are recorded and they stay on the channel hopefully forever. When we're all long gone, these videos will still be floating around there, probably forgotten in some dark corner of the internet. But anyway, you can come back and watch this later. Xiao Guo says, I think you would lose 1 mark if the question is for 2 marks when you make a spelling mistake. We're talking about written comprehension there, not multiple choice comprehension. Usually you wouldn't lose a mark for a spelling mistake in a written comprehension as long as your meaning is clear. Once you get into anything creative, then spelling mistakes start to matter a lot. However, it's a good idea to spell correctly because you keep the examiner on side. And I must say, some schools follow a different approach and do take marks off for spelling mistakes. But we're doing multiple choice, so spelling mistakes do not matter. Question 15. In outward appearance, it was a town in which the wealthy classes had practically ceased to exist. What does the phrase "in outward appearance" suggest? Okay, so we're clearly focused on that. But let's think about the rest of the quotation. The wealthy classes. Okay, what are the wealthy classes? I bet you have some idea about that. It isn't that difficult. You have some idea of social class, of the concept behind it. And so the wealthy classes, the wealthy groups in society, the people who have money, have a good amount of money or maybe have lots of money, had practically ceased to exist. Practically means, well, means pretty much virtually, more or less. Right. What does in outward appearance suggest? If something's true in outward appearance, in these cases, be an actor. Imagine some situations in which you might say that something is true in outward appearance. Okay? So if I said, let's pick a name from the comments here, if I said Wilton W is, in outward appearance, a nice person. Why aren't I just saying Wilton W is a nice person? But I'm instead saying they are in outward appearance a nice person. I'm qualifying it. I'm expressing doubt. I'm saying they look like a nice person, but are they really? I'm sure that Wilton W is a lovely person, but you're unlucky enough for me to have picked on your name. Okay. So that's kind of what in outward appearance is doing. So what does the phrase in outward appearance suggest? This was an obvious fact. It just doesn't match the phrase at all. Orwell thinks that wealthy people are actually still there. Maybe, need a bit more thought. Wealthy people have become poorer as shown by their scruffy clothes. Maybe, this was evident from the appearance of the streets and buildings. Evident. Evident means clear. An apparent fact. Something's obvious, rather. And again, that doesn't match in outward appearance. Everything from the changes in spoken language to the conventions by which people dressed indicated that wealthy people had left the city. Well, indicated could suggest some doubt, but everything indicated it. Yeah, it might match, I suppose. It might match the whole quotation. In outward appearance, it was a town in which the wealthy class had practically ceased to exist. But does the phrase in outward appearance specifically support this idea that everything from this to this to this to this to this supported it? Well, if that's your view, why do you say in outward appearance? Not sure it's a great match. I'll put a kind of bracketed squiggle out. I don't know, something like that. Let's focus on B and C. We can always come back to E if they don't work. Orwell thinks that wealthy people are actually still there. Wealthy people have become poorer as shown by their scruffy clothes. So that's what we need to check for in the passage. Now, I always say that you need to check the passage carefully before answering a question. And that is almost always the case. This was a bit of an exception because we're given enough information by the phrase in outward appearance to start ruling some out irrespective of what the passage says. In outward appearance, we've established that it expresses some doubt, so words like obvious, evident cannot be the answer. That's why I've started with the options and haven't gone straight into the text. Right, that out of the way, let's roll down a bit towards that quotation. So we have got, where are we here? Line 61. In outward appearance, it was a town in which the wealthy classes had practically ceased to exist. We'll keep with red, seeing as we're talking about the purported socialist idyll here. So in outward appearance, it was a town in which the wealthy classes had practically... If you don't know why red, Wikipedia. Teacher recommending Wikipedia. Except for a small number of women and foreigners, there were no well-dressed people at all. Practically everyone wore rough working class clothes or blue overalls or some variant of the militia uniform. Okay, so there's no sign of the wealthy people. They seem to have gone away. Apart from the odd woman or foreign person, it's interesting how women are kind of excluded from the category of the wealthy classes, but other times, other customs. Practically everyone wore working class clothes or blue overalls. Okay, so everyone is dressing like a working person rather than a wealthy person. All this was queer and moving, so strange and, emotional. Much I did not understand, blah, blah, blah. I believed that things were as they appeared. But let's skip to the end, because you'll already have read this properly. I did not realise that great numbers of well-to-do bourgeois, word to think about, were simply lying low and disguising themselves as proletarians for the time being. Lots of difficult words here that you almost certainly will not know. And I must say, if you know the meaning of the words bourgeois and proletarian, then I am seriously impressed. But that's kind of the point. Can you work round these words and either work out their meanings or work out the answers despite not knowing their meanings? The key thing here is that great numbers of well-to-do, you'll know that phrase, I'm sure, were disguising themselves as something else for the time being. And if we look at the rest above, in outward appearance the wealthy people had gone, everyone wore working class clothes. I didn't realise at the time that a lot of the well-to-do were just lying low, you get that right, hiding, or hiding their wealth and disguising themselves as, well, what was everyone dressed as? As a worker, so as proletarians, so that must be members of the working class for the time being. That's why this is such a difficult comprehension task. Not necessarily because the questions themselves are difficult when you have all the information in front of you, but because very few questions are just about looking at one line, taking the answer and putting it into the answer box. You have to read whole sections of it, understand what's going on, even despite not understanding all the difficult words, find the right bits of information, pull them together into an impression that allows you to say, Orwell thinks that wealthy people were actually still there. They hadn't become poorer. They were wearing scruffy clothes to hide the fact that they were rich and pass themselves off as members of the working class so that they wouldn't be persecuted or have their money taken away. Okay? And that's how we end up zooming in on option B. In outward appearance, the wealthy classes had practically ceased to exist, but after a while, Orwell worked out that they were still there, but lying low and pretending to be something else. And you might get a sense of what kind of political setup we've got here. That they're trying to build a society for the workers in which people aren't allowed to store up lots of money and privilege for themselves, but have to share everything with everybody else. And the text is all about the attempt to build that kind of society and Orwell's first impressions of it. Okay, let's push on. And lo and behold, we got a question about that. How did Orwell feel about Barcelona's new society in December 1936? Right, interesting. So, his feelings were dominated by a dislike of its falseness. He found it puzzling and not always appealing. However, he felt that a society based on working class values was too important a thing to risk being lost. He loved it and felt that something so wonderful was worth dying for. At last he had found a model of society that made sense to him. He profoundly disliked it. This is hard. Okay. Ooh, question from Best Boy, which is simultaneously a really good question because it's important and a bad question because it shows you have not been listening to everything I've said in this lesson. The question says, if you read the text first, you will still have to go back to the text sometimes, so what is the point of reading the text first? Well, look at that question that we just answered, where we had information that was up here, around there, information that was down here. If you hadn't read the text first, you'd go straight to line 61. In outward appearance, it was a town in which the wealthy class had practically ceased to exist. And then you see the text going on and talking about all sorts of other things, which seem to be about how they had in fact disappeared. So you'd be led into the wrong answer. It's only if you've already read the whole text, so you know that there is this bit down here, look at my coordination of two hands, which explains it, that you can answer the question. So, reading the passage in advance gives you the geography. So don't be like the militiamen at the beginning not understanding the map. You need to know the map of the passage and know where different things are discussed, so that when you come to the particular question, you know where to find the information so that you get the right answer and don't fall into traps. So both are essential. You must read the text first, and you must go back to the text when you answer the questions. I hope that makes it clear. I think this is a really good example. Right. Nripendra writes, Best Boy, listen to him. Yeah, listen to me. Tahir says, first time on live lesson with you. It's lovely to have you. I hope you're finding it useful. Okay, right, back to this question, which is, how did Orwell feel about Barcelona's new society in December 1936? Woof, and the options are so difficult. Really, really hard, touching on politics, on really subtle differences of emotions. Whew, this is challenging. Okay, but that's what we're here for. It is a lesson on hard multiple choice comprehension. Okay, so we look at the dates. Let's just pop back to the beginning and see whether that helps us. So it describes Orwell's experiences in the Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 39. Okay? And this is about the beginning, the early period, just before he joined the militia and so on. And I think there were some references to date in the passage. Yes, this was in, where are we here? This was in late December 1936, less than 7 months ago as I write. Okay, so that's important to know. And later events have changed what happened at that time. In his mind, have changed his memories of that time. Right, that's important to bear in mind. Now, let's skip to the key bit, which you will know where it is. The most relevant part, and you will know where it is if you've read the text already. But you're still probably going to have to look for it a bit because there's so much in this text. It's really, really dense. It's a very famous book, this, by the way, Homage to Catalonia. And at some point, I really recommend reading it. It's really fantastic. But you need to have some understanding of some of these political ideas to make head or tail of it. Maybe you'll learn them from reading the book. Who knows? Anyway, it's about someone going out with a very strong ideology and a strong sense of what's right and wrong and how the world should be run, and really having to confront a reality that quite radically changes the way that he thinks, while also keeping aspects of it. But anyway, you'll read the book someday. Okay. All this was queer and moving. There was much in it that I did not understand, and in some ways I did not even like it. But I recognized it immediately as a state of affairs worth fighting for. Also, I believed that things were as they appeared, that this really was a workers' state, and that all the wealthy people had run away, been killed, or had changed sides. I did not realize then that they were actually just hiding away, and we've discussed that. So the key bit is likely to be here. There was much that I did not understand. In some ways I didn't even like it, but I recognized that it was still something worth fighting for. We're thinking about whether there are some ideas, some ways of life that you would feel similarly about. Ways that people live that you personally don't really get them. You don't even like them especially, but you think it's really important that the world should contain them somewhere, and so you would still fight for them. Is there anything like that? Are there any other points of view that you would think about in that way? Something for you to take away and think about. It's a very difficult question, but you have to ask yourselves these questions in order to have a chance of getting into the writer's mindset and engaging with their ideas. Right, spiel for me over, temporarily. How did he feel? His feelings were dominated by a dislike of its falseness. Well, he does say, in some ways I did not even like it, but the dominant feeling is that it was worth fighting for. And he wouldn't have said that if his feelings were dominated by dislike. No, not the right answer. B looks really long. Let's skip that for a bit. Whoa. C, he loved it and felt that something so wonderful was worth dying for. One of the features of difficult comprehension is that often a wrong answer will contain something right. He did think it was worth dying for, but he did not love it. He did not think it was so wonderful, because he says that in some ways I did not even like it. It's not compatible with this option. His feelings are mixed. It's not overwhelming love and wonder. At last he had found a model of society that made sense to him. Interesting. Could it be that? There was much in it that I did not understand. Nope, it is not that. The thing here is, you don't need to understand every aspect of all these sentences perfectly. If you can see made sense to him and see much I did not understand in the text, you know that's wrong. If you can see, in some ways I didn't even like it, you can see that loved it is wrong, and so on. You do not need to fully understand all these emotional and political ideas. You just need to work intelligently using the comprehension skills that you're learning here and in many of my other videos. Best Boy says, how do you deal with a complicated text like Charles Dickens? Like this. This text is at least as complicated as any text from Dickens you're likely to find, and this is probably a harder text, I would say. Deliberately, I've chosen something very, very difficult here. He profoundly disliked it. Option E, sorry. In some ways, I did not even like it, but I recognised it as something worth fighting for. Some ways, that's not profoundly disliking it. That's a mixed emotion. There were some things about it he didn't like. Yeah. We're left with option B. He found it puzzling and not always appealing. Okay, puzzling, not always appealing. Much I didn't understand, some ways did not even like it. Yep, those two definitely match. He felt that a society based on working class values was too important a thing to risk being lost. Okay, this is very wordy, deliberately to make it a bit hard, but he recognised it immediately as a state of affairs worth fighting for. In other words, too important a thing to risk being lost. And he goes on to say, I believe that this was really a workers' state. So, in other words, a society based on working class values. So B is the answer. And that, my friends, is about as difficult as it gets with an 11 plus multiple choice comprehension question. That is as hard as can be. So well done if you got that right, like all these squizillions of people in the comments writing B, and Miniman who's written B lots of times. You can only have the mark once. Right, what does bourgeoisie in line 68 mean? Right, line 68, that the entire bourgeoisie, I'm going to do some rubbing out here because otherwise it's going to be hard to see what we're doing. There we go. And colour, what should we go for this time? Let's go for orange, just to be contrary, because it isn't a especially nice colour here. Right, entire bourgeoisie. Facebook viewer, please do not write B squizillions of times. It's just spamming the comments. Yes, Tahir, I agree. Everyone stop saying B. We've got it. It's B. I've already told you. Right. The entire bourgeoisie had either fled. Well, let's go back a bit. So this is all about the business of the rich people seeming to have gone, and Orwell's mixed feelings about what's happening here. I believe that this was really a worker state, and the entire bourgeoisie had either fled or been killed or changed or come over to the workers' side. So the bourgeoisie must be the other side from the workers. What could that be? Maybe it's the army, maybe it's the government, maybe it's the people who aren't workers. If you aren't a worker, what are you? You're probably the person who, unless you're unemployed, you're probably a person who tells people to do work for you, for example. So a few options there. I did not realise that great numbers of well-to-do bourgeois, okay, that word again, bourgeois, bourgeoisie, bourgeois, clearly same idea here, in some way. Well-to-do bourgeois was simply lying low and disguising themselves as what? Well, must have been as workers, because that's what everyone is dressed as, apart from those who are wearing militia uniform. So these are well-to-do people who hide away by disguising themselves as workers. So in other words, they are the rich or the relatively rich people. It's really hard, but if you read carefully enough around the ideas here, it's really impossible to end up with another conclusion, I think. So we are talking about must be the wealthy middle class. It's not the working class. We actually worked that one out already. That was the proletariat. It says proletarians in line 70. And I explained why a few minutes ago. Members of the militia, no. Communist and anarchist leadership, there's nothing to suggest that at all. People killed in war, nothing to suggest that. Loads of evidence for B. And there we are. And we're almost there. I think this is the last one. Yep, flaming line 56 is an example of adjective, metaphor, adverb, alliteration, or main clause. What? Well, I can tell you straight away that it cannot be an example of a main clause, because it isn't a clause, it's just a word. Okay? Clause, to put things in simple terms, is a section of a sentence that would be divided with a comma at either end or both ends, depending where it is. And I suppose it just isn't. Just clearly isn't. But let's go into the text and have a look at flaming, line 56. Okay, so let's find a different colour. A bit of green here, why not? Just to be confusing, as it's flaming. But we've got some red there already. I've been talking too much, my voice is going like this. Flaming from the walls. The revolutionary posters were everywhere, flaming from the walls, running from the walls, bursting from the walls, spitting from the walls. Why am I doing this? Because I'm trying to fill it in with all kinds of words that might fit. And they are all verbs, clearly. They're doing words, what these posters were doing from the walls. So it is not an adjective, it is not an adverb, and it's not a main clause. And we can see that clearly here because in fact it's part of a longer phrase, flaming from the walls, blah blah blah. Is it a metaphor or is it alliteration? Flaming from the walls, we need another F word really near it, and there isn't one. The next one I can find is few, well after it, and it's not alliterating, so it's not alliteration. So the only option left is metaphor. Is it a metaphor? Are these posters really on fire? Of course not. They're flaming in clean reds and blues that make everything else seem dull. This is about how vivid and striking and kind of beautiful these posters were in their way. But they weren't really on fire. It's a metaphor. In other words, it's when something is described as being something or doing something that it is not, without a like or something like that. It's a metaphor. B. Okay, so that one, if you know a little bit about, parts of speech and literary techniques, it's not too difficult. And we're there. Great. Yes, I've left the worked solutions for these questions in the worksheet below. So if you want to look at these in more detail and look at different ways that I explain them from how I've explained them in this video, you can go to the worksheet and work with those solutions. Right, God, my voice is getting tickly as anything, so I think it's time to push on and wrap this up fairly soon. It's been a long lesson. Okay, time for the Fortunately, I've got a fairly short and simple tip of the week this time, which suits the state of my voice. You, as you do your practice and your exam preparation and all kinds of work, are going to come across things that you find difficult, things that you keep getting wrong. And you will be tempted to keep practicing them and practicing them and practicing them and practicing them in a desperate desire to sort them out. Rather than just doing that, take the time to stop, take a metaphorical deep breath, and think, why? Why am I getting this wrong? What is going wrong on my thought process? Which background information am I missing? How can I fix this? Get in the habit when you come across a problem of approaching it like that and finding a productive way to solve it, rather than just thinking, help, I'm not good at this, I'm going to practice it 50 times, which often means that you don't sort out the fundamental problems at all. And you just end up building up panic and perhaps practicing the same mistakes, so you actually end up more inclined to get the same things wrong. When things are hard, just remember to sit back and ask yourself, why is it wrong? How can I change this? And then practice in a constructive way based on the lessons that you've learned. Take time to think and ask why. Simple as that. Right. And finally, the section you're all here for. And as I often remind you at this point, there's about a 30-second delay between what I say and you hearing it, so it takes a while for me to see your questions come through. So I'm going to scroll back through and see if there are any other questions lurking here. Christopher McCabe, I think that's probably Sam looking in the background, says a clause must contain a subject and a verb. Yes, certainly a main clause does. Yes, I think that's right. God, terrible being my grammar pulled up here, but yes, I think you are right. Thank you. Hashim says, I've been watching you every week and I enjoy your lessons. I've done 3 exams. I have 2 exams left. I've done 11 plus Kes in Birmingham, Henry's in Coventry. I haven't done Highclere and Tricross. Whoa, what a load of schools. Well done. What else have we got here? You know what? I'm not getting many questions here. It must be because I've answered them all in the past. Well, I'm not going to get too worried about that, because if you want to go away and enjoy your evening, I don't have to deal with questions. Lots of people making sad comments about my cat Hans, who died a few months ago, so thank you very much for your sympathy there. Are there any educational free apps that you recommend? I really don't know. I'm not really up there on educational apps, so I wouldn't know. If they're free, then I would suggest that you try lots of them and find out what works, and then you can share your recommendations here. How do you study for the ISEB? I think you mean the ISEB pre-test, I would guess, which is the computer test that a lot of schools use to pre-filter candidates before their main written exams. How do you study for that? Well, the key skills are 11 plus syllabus skills. So things like multiple choice, comprehension, math skills and reasoning skills and so on. So the main thing is don't skimp on the key knowledge. Make sure that you are learning these important things and not just practicing exam style. There are various companies out there, things like Atom, Bofa, Pretest Plus, who sell ISEB practice, and it is useful doing some computer practice like that to get used to the exam format. Main thing is just don't panic about it. Do your normal 11 plus preparation and then do a bit of exam format practice towards the exam so that you're not surprised by the exam style when it comes along. Do you skip a part if you're really stuck, or take lots of time in it if it's a practice paper? I treat a practice paper just like an exam, so rather than wasting time on something, skip it and come back later. The only time I wouldn't do that would be if you are doing an adaptive online test, where which question comes next depends on whether you got a previous question right. And in those kinds of exams, you have to be really careful with the early questions, or you'll find it almost impossible to get a good mark. I'm not going to explain that in more detail. It's quite subtle, but you can research adaptive tests online. So the basic rule is, if it's going to waste time, skip it and come back, except if it's a computer test, when first of all, can you come back? And secondly, will it affect the rest of the test if you skip it or get it wrong? So, skip it, come back. Some caveats for a computer test. In GCSE, do you have to do verbal and non-verbal? I can't think of any GCSE tests where you have to do verbal and non-verbal, no. If you're low in time, there are lots of questions to answer. What do we do? I mean, I don't want to sound facetious, but the most important thing is try not to get into that situation. So learn good exam timing strategies so that you keep on moving and don't end up with 5 minutes left and 10 questions to answer. If you do find yourself in that situation, then you need to make the best of it you can. Don't leave any questions unanswered. Do your best to get the right answers. In multiple choice, that might involve a little bit of educated guessing. So you look at a question, you can quickly see that some answers are not going to be right. You might end up having to choose between the leftovers a little bit more, with a bit more haste than you would have done otherwise. It's just reality. Jesse says, goodbye, Sir Robert S. Lomax. Goodbye, Dame Jessie R. But yeah, if you're short of time and you just need to make the most of it, don't leave blanks, you'll come up with strategies. I have said some things about this elsewhere, but I don't want to get too bogged down in it now. Best Boy says, can you change the time for your lessons, please? Because I usually have tuition at this time. I'm afraid I'm not going to change the time of the lessons, but these videos are always on the channel after the lessons for everyone a day, so you can just watch them later on. How do you deal with much less time for the set of questions? In my exam, I had 48 questions in 9 minutes. 48 questions in 9 minutes? That must have been because you were running out of time. They can't have set the exam like that. That wouldn't make any sense, so I don't quite understand. If you mean you ran out of time, then I guess that's what I just spoke about. A Noodles says, I still watch you even though I passed my exams. Thank you so much, Noodles. I'm delighted to have you here. fantastic. I'm very flattered. Various people asking what we're doing next time. I have already planned this, but I've just forgotten. Let me check this. Go into my worksheets folder. Next time we are doing, drum roll, symmetry and rotation, something that lots of people have asked for. Right, I'm going to wrap up this soon, you know. Wrap this up. I can't even speak in English sentences. Sam, aka Christopher McCabe, in the comments would not approve of my grammar at this point. Okay, let's call it a day there. It's been lovely having you here. Thank you very much for all joining in with so many squizillions of fantastic comments and for bearing with this really difficult comprehension. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. You can always unsubscribe later if you change your mind. Please check the links in the video description. If you sign up for the free papers and solutions, then you'll also get on the mailing list and find out about the worksheets for these lessons in advance and get emails about my short videos and just, you know, the whole Easy 11 Plus package, I guess. These lessons are every Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock, and it's been lovely to have you here. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.